Episode 2, my rebuttal to Maxwell's opinion that real estate agents are useless. Another blessed day in South Florida. I'm Gaetgens Chery, founder of Homesnatch Realty, and I thank you for your continued support. Well, if this is your first visit to this channel, I welcome you and I thank you for watching. On this channel, I answer all your real estate questions. Whether you are looking to buy, sell, lease, or manage your real estate property, I strive to make this channel your hub for everything related to real estate. So, if real estate is something that interests you, please subscribe and click on the bell to be notified when I post new videos. Also, please share, comment, and yes, crush the like button. On this episode, episode 2 of my rebuttal to YouTuber Maxwell's claim that the internet rendered licensed real estate agents useless. Mr. Maxwell's opinion were so inaccurate, I could not possibly address all the fallacies in one video. Instead, well, I could have, but if I did, the video would have been closer to 45 minutes. However, I decided to address all his fallacies in 2 episodes. However, my intention is not to attack Mr. Maxwell personally, rather my intention is to highlight the fallacies about the comments he made. On June 13th, 2020, Mr. Maxwell posted a video entitled "The Disappearing Agent in Real Estate" with a subtitle that asked, "Are real estate agents useless?" As a Florida licensed real estate broker and a Florida licensed real estate instructor, I could not disagree with Mr. Maxwell's comment more. So, if you watch that segment of his video, I strongly encourage you to watch these 2 videos where I highlight the fallacies in Mr. Maxwell's comments. In episode 1, for example, I compare the practices of an unlicensed real estate wholesaler to the practices of a licensed real estate agent, also known as a licensee. Also, I highlighted his fallacies in the statement he made about buyer's agent. If you have not watched episode 1, I strongly encourage you to watch it. In episode 2, however, this episode, I will highlight the fallacies in Mr. Maxwell's comments about seller's agent. So, let's continue with Mr. Maxwell's opinion piece. While most of his discussions are somewhat disorganized, I will address all the relevant points. After sharing his expert opinion with his audience about buyer's agent, Mr. Maxwell proceeded to express his opinion about seller's agent. At timestamp 2540, Mr. Maxwell continued and said, quote, "Now you guys, please don't beat me up in the comments. I'm only reading what they say they do and comparing it to what is actually done. I deal with agents all the time. My right-hand man, Francis, is a real licensed agent. I love him to death. And he is actually one of those 2 to 5% people that really get into the dirt." Here, once again, Mr. Maxwell seemed overly concerned that his audience will express unfavorable comments because he simply expressed his opinion. But by now, I understand his reasons for concern. Clearly, Mr. Maxwell knew his statements lack validity. In what appeared to be a desperate attempt to convince his audience, Mr. Maxwell proclaimed that he was only reading and comparing what he read on NAR's website to what agents actually do. As I stated previously in episode 1, NAR does not define the role for licensees. Also, note, up till now, Mr. Maxwell has not actually made any comparison, contradicting what he says. Contrary to what he said, he did not make any comparison. But he was determined to convince the public, his audience, that real estate agents are useless. He informed his audience that his right-hand man, Francis, is a real licensed agent, as if there are some fake agents. Hold on. Well, Mr. Maxwell may have a point there, because if Francis is a real licensed agent, in other words, a licensed real estate agent among many unlicensed wholesalers, that would make Francis a real licensed agent. However, I doubt Mr. Francis is in the top 2 to 5% tier of real estate agents because he failed to inform Mr. Maxwell about the fallacies in his statement. Remember, Mr. Maxwell's opinion is that licensed real estate agents are useless because the internet provides everything one needs to manage one's real estate transactions. Yet, Mr. Maxwell himself uses the services of a licensed real estate agent. Because according to Mr. Maxwell, his right-hand man, Francis, is a real licensed agent. You see the irony here? Nonetheless, Mr. Maxwell continues in his effort to convince the audience, his audience, and the public at large that real estate agents are useless. He said, quote, according to the National Association of Realtors, also known as NAR, their website, if you are selling your house, a selling agent, meaning the seller's agent, they are supposed to provide you with up-to-date information on the market to determine a reasonable price. But he added, there's a difference between the asking price and the selling price, because back in the day, agents would do this thing. He went on to state, the bank requires the house that you are buying, if you are the buyer, to be appraised. So he stated, you can get a true appraisal for between $300 to $600. Here, Mr. Maxwell convinced me that at best, he does not understand the real estate business and the role that real estate agents play. Or at worst, he intended to deceive his audience because he suggested that back in the day, agents will do this thing as if to imply agents are dishonest, or maybe agents back then were dishonest because the selling price could be different than the actual recommended listed price. Remember, licensees owe their clients the duty of loyalty, meaning licensees cannot adopt an attitude that is adverse to their clients' best interests. Also, licensees must strive to obtain the best price and terms for their clients. Surely Mr. Maxwell did not expect anyone to analyze his publicly stated statement. Licensed real estate agents must possess 3 essential skill sets, which are valuation, being able to evaluate the value of the property, marketing, being able to market the property so that as many eyes sees the property, and property transfer, meaning understanding the process to transfer the property from one owner to another. Those are 3 basic skill sets that real estate agents must have. In fact, the first question a seller will ask a licensed agent is, how much is my house worth? In other words, an appraisal. The agent, I've shared with you in episode 1 that in Florida, licensed real estate agents are allowed to perform an appraisal. We call that the CMA, or we can do a BPO, a comparative market analysis, or a broker's price opinion. Now, an appraisal is not a science, it is an art. In other words, an appraisal is an estimate of value. That is true whether a licensed appraiser or a licensed real estate agent performs the appraisal. Whereas the sales price is the amount the buyer is willing to pay and the seller is willing to accept. Therefore, it is not unsurprising, there's no trickery, that the licensee may recommend a particular asking price based on what the market is stating, and the parties may agree on a different price, which is the sales price. Or better yet, the licensee can recommend a particular sales price, and yet the appraiser comes up with a different number. But that does not imply licensees are doing this thing. It's not a trick. Okay, let's move on to Mr. Maxwell's statement. He said, and I quote, "They show you the terms and conditions of competing properties." He added, Zillow, the internet. Develop a marketing plan that could include suggestions, repairs, open houses, and advertising. Now, he continued, I will say the best agents possible are the ones that actually know how to do marketing. That's what you really should get an agent for. The ones who are on top of the game when it comes to marketing. But this day and age, question mark, close quote. Now, finally, Mr. Maxwell seemed to find something he thinks licensees can do to justify their right to earn an honest living. Ironically, Mr. Maxwell seemed to place a great deal of value on marketing skills. I wonder why. But you know what? I digress. Mr. Maxwell, let's get back to Mr. Maxwell, because he shared more of his opinion with his audience and, of course, the public at large. Please listen to what Mr. Maxwell said next, and I quote, "Listen, I used to be a realtor back in 2004. I believe in late 2004. Even back then, statistic that never left my mind is that 78% of people looking for houses in real estate started their searches online. So all the information is online as far as what the prices should be. At the beginning, I stated that my intention is to highlight the fallacies in Mr. Maxwell's statement. Here, I find it extremely hard to believe that Mr. Maxwell ever held a real estate license in any state, particularly due to the many fallacies in his statements, and the fact that he could not even remember the date he held said license. Perhaps Mr. Maxwell managed to convince some members of his audience, at least those who wanted to be convinced. Personally, I'm not convinced that Mr. Maxwell held a real estate license in 2004 or at any other time, because anyone who ever held a real estate license should understand the purpose for real estate licensing laws and licensing requirement and in the real estate industry. Remember, caveat emptor. I hope you remember that term. Caveat emptor. Buyer beware. However, Mr. Maxwell unknowingly mentioned one statistic that contradicts everything he said. Although Mr. Maxwell failed to disclose the source of that particular statistics, he said in 2004, 78% of home buyers were using the internet for their home searches. Yet, in 2022, 18 years later, most prudent home buyers continued to use licensed real estate agents to help them facilitate their real estate transaction. Mr. Maxwell's own statements indicates that home buyers are aware and use the internet as a source for information. Yet, most prudent home buyers choose to use the services of a real estate brokerage. Nonetheless, Mr. Maxwell continued with his opinion piece and his attempt to convince his audience and the larger public that real estate agents are useless. He continued and said, quote, "Anyways, they provide security for your home when it's being shown to strangers. That's true." Unquote. Mr. Maxwell thinks licensees serve a purpose to sellers, but only as a watchful eye when they're showing the property. But Mr. Maxwell knows too well that a seller's agent does far more than be a lookout. For example, a licensed real estate agent would prevent the seller from falling victim to the tactics wholesalers use to strip homeowners of their equity. Unsurprisingly, Mr. Maxwell does not think licensees offer anything more to their sellers, to their clients. He continued with the following, quote, negotiate the best price for your homes. He stated, I don't know. Monitor the sales price as negotiate as needed. Now, like I said, I'm reading directly from the National Association of Realtors website. But he added, I personally don't believe there is much difference between filling out the paperwork for a $2 million home or a $200,000 house. Now, there's a huge difference in commission, but there's not much difference when filling out or when doing the paperwork, close quote. As I stated in episode 1, licensees must use skill, care, diligence, meaning licensees must stay informed on changes and developments that may affect the value of the property, and use diligence in facilitating the transaction. Likewise, licensees owe a duty to their clients. The duty that they owe to their clients, among many, is the duty of loyalty, meaning licensees cannot adopt an attitude that is adverse to their clients' interests. Licensees must work for the best price and terms for their client. Further, licensees owe their clients a duty of full disclosure, meaning licensee must keep their clients informed of any information that might affect the transaction or the value of the property. I say it again, Mr. Maxwell is misinformed because the National Association of Realtors, also known as NAR, does not define the duties for real estate agents. Rather, each state has its own law that regulates the real estate industry within its jurisdictions. Please watch episode 1 for more details regarding that. Again, Mr. Maxwell failed to inform his audience that real estate brokerage service fees are negotiable. Therefore, a seller, or a buyer for that matter, can always negotiate the brokerage fee with the broker. But for now, let's continue with Mr. Maxwell's opinion that licensed real estate agents are useless. Mr. Maxwell stated, the parties that are important are the real estate attorney who closes the deal, or the transaction coordinator who actually works for the real estate attorney, or the escrow company, also referred to as the title company. Because, according to him, most of the time, when you get the house you are buying under contract, you start communicate with the closing office. And you rarely, according to Mr. Maxwell, you rarely get to hear from your agent. And when you talk to your agent, they call back because they must call the transaction coordinator who is going to relay the message back to you. Again, in my opinion, Mr. Maxwell is either misinformed or, at worst, intended to mislead the audience and the public at large. Remember, before a potential buyer and seller get into contract, the buyer must first locate a suitable property. The buyer must place an offer on that property. The buyer and seller must negotiate the terms and conditions of the offer. Let's call them the parties. The parties must agree with the terms and conditions of the offer. If the parties have the meeting of the mind, also that's the offer and acceptance. So if we have meeting of the minds, meaning the seller accepts the buyer's offer. The acceptance must be communicated to all parties to the contract. Only then do the parties have a contract that is enforceable in a court of law. Clearly, folks, the title company, also known as the closer, and or the attorney who conduct the title search those two parties do not enter into the home buying process until after the seller and buyer negotiated and agreed to create a contract. Further, please understand, the closer, the title company, or the attorney that conduct the title search, neither one of them either has anything to do with representing the buyer or the seller. Let me rephrase that. The closer does not represent either of the parties, not the buyer, not the seller. Rather, the closer's main purpose is to ensure the title to the property is marketable. In other words, is sellable. Meaning the closer makes sure that the property is not encumbered with liens and or easement that may jeopardize the lender's interest, the lender that's given the buyer the loan. Simply put, the closer represents the lender and protects the lender's interest, not the party's interest. Of course, a home buyer can always find a home on his own and hire an attorney to negotiate the terms to the contract, but the buyer will incur additional costs. Generally, in a residential transaction, the seller pays the listing broker and the buyer pays the financing and the buyer's share of closing costs. Typically, there are two basic types of representation, one for the seller and one for the buyer. The seller hires the real estate brokerage, that is also known as the listing agent, to sell the house, and that person represent the seller's agent. That brokerage represent the seller's interest in the transaction. The seller and the listing agent negotiate the terms of the seller's brokerage agreement, also known as a listing contract. Technically, the listing agent is responsible for finding a buyer. However, the listing agent lists the property on the MLS and offer a share of the portion of the commission to any other brokerage that brings a buyer who buys the property. Whereas the buyer's brokerage, known as the selling agent, is the one who negotiates the contract on behalf of the buyer. The selling agent is the one who coordinates everything with the listing agent, the title company, the lender, the inspector, etc., etc. I discussed the process in a previous video entitled, "Why Should I Sign a Brokerage Agreement with a Real Estate Agent?" So please, I will post the link to the video's description. Please watch that video for more information about the process. The question should be, why does an unlicensed real estate wholesaler, why would an unlicensed real estate wholesaler go to such extreme to convince the audience and or the public that licensed real estate agents are useless? Well, at timestamp 28:33, Mr. Maxwell closes his opinion piece. Finally, he says the following: "So, I know you guys are going to beat me up in the comments. I know people are going to say, well, this and that. But I truly want to know what you guys have to say. But do you think we need real estate agents. And what do real estate agents really do that the internet has not decentralized? Now you tell me. I appreciate you guys for tuning in. Close quote. Well, unsurprisingly, Mr. Maxwell closed his opinion piece with the same level of concern for what he declared his opinion. But contrary to Mr. Maxwell's belief, I personally did not unsubscribe to his YouTube channel. Instead, I decided to accept his offer and share my opinion with him as to the role licensed real estate agents play in protecting the public at large. Apparently, Mr. Maxwell seems to have a huge online presence. Therefore, Mr. Maxwell's influence reaches a great number of people. In my humble opinion, I believe such a platform comes with great responsibility. A platform that is as large as he has, I believe that platform comes with a great deal of responsibility. Now, as I demonstrated in the last 2 videos, Mr. Maxwell's statements, the statements he made while sharing his opinion, lack veracity. More importantly, if people follow his statements, those statements can cause great harm to home buyers and sellers. For most people, buying a home is likely to be the most expensive expenditure of their lifetime. While the internet provides a great deal of resources to homeowners and buyers, the internet is not a substitute for the services of a licensed real estate agent. Mr. Maxwell seems to be very passionate about what he does, about his craft. Similarly, licensed real estate agents have that same passion for their clients, for their craft. Our craft is helping people achieve their dream of home ownership. So, we are as passionate as Mr. Maxwell. So, as a passionate Florida real estate licensed broker and a licensed real estate instructor, I feel it necessary to share to help address some of the fallacies in Mr. Maxwell's publicly stated opinion. I hope I didn't betray my promise. I did not attack Mr. Maxwell personally. I wanted to keep it on the merit and based on his statements. As always, folks, I greatly appreciate your continued support. And thank you for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe. And yes, click on the bell if you want to be notified of the time when I post new videos. As well, don't forget to share, comment, and yes, crush the like button. Have a blessed and productive day. Have a good one. Bye.